Um, yeah. So you touched on something very interesting, which is the Enlightenment, right? And how the turn of the Enlightenment um, sort of got us to prioritize and elevate seeing, right? The eye. I think I love the way you put it. Is the subjugation of the ear beneath the eye, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
So maybe you can elaborate on that, because I think I totally agree with you. But I just want to hear you like do a deep dive into it.
Yeah. I mean, one of the kind of hallmarks of the Enlightenment, even like thinking of Kant's original, like what is the Enlightenment, is the emphasis on rationality in opposition to emotion, which is an interesting way to put things, I think, for a number of reasons, because they don't actually function independently of one another. But in any case, there was the emphasis of rationality over emotion and or affect in general, and the ear and the eye get involved in that. So what the kind of eye allows you to do, right? It allows you to look at something, but not engage with it, right? Like you can look at it and set it aside. It allows you to stand back, right? You don't have to participate in it. You don't have to reach out. You don't have to, it's not coming at you in the same way. And it's also not, it's not live necessarily, right? Like you can take an image of something and look at it later.
Yeah.
Right? So that's what I mean about kind of setting aside. You can have that thing and look at it or not look at it, and put it there or not put it there, and close your eyes, open your eyes. But it allows you to maintain distance and something, at least the illusion of separation from that thing that you're dealing with. The ear and voice don't really allow you to do that, right? They're temporal. So if a sound happens, like right now, if there's a car outside that I can hear go by, I don't have the option to close my ears to that, right? Like it's happening now to me, and whether I like it or not, I'm involved in this space, in this context, and I can't put it aside in the same way. And sound, not to say that vision doesn't, but sound is one of the many ways that people experience, emotions and kind of heightened affective dispositions. And having sound operate in that way, where you can't set it aside in the same way that you can something that's visual, means that you're also kind of emotionally and effectively engaged with that. And you can't really do much about it, like you can plug your ears or whatever, but you're still kind of in it. And so what happens, with the Enlightenment, when there's such an emphasis on the objectivity and, there's no subject involved, or the subject doesn't impact the object, and, this kind of removal from affect and emphasis on rationality, is you get the emphasis of the eye, of that ability to set things aside, to look at it from a distance, to be in some way above it rather than with it. And so the ear kind of falls to secondary. Like it's not that important. It's not really a rational thing, not to say that things like music and so forth like weren't pursued in the Enlightenment, but they were understood differently, or to operate differently, and not the subject of academic or intellectual or really like substantive conversation and writing in the same way that they had been previously. And it's interesting now, in our kind of, you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, sort of interconnections, or finding people that are happy to make and interested in making connections between different spaces. And I think one of the things that we're seeing is all of these things have always been interconnected. I think we're at a point where we're able to see that a little bit more clearly, and we're being forced to see that. And part of that, I think, is falling away of structuralism, and also the sort of Enlightenment ideals of hierarchy, of rational connection as being the sole way to interact with the world, or that you should interact with the world. So in any case, I think, it's interesting in sort of this kind of post-structural, potentially postmodern, depending on how you want to look at it. But in any case, to sort of see some of those organizational pieces that were so fundamental for a time fall apart, or not fall apart, but realizing that they actually don't really work that well and are not reflective of what we do and experience.
Yeah, yeah. I was just thinking that whenever I want to alter my mood,
Mm-hmm.
listen to music as opposed to watch pictures, you know,
Yeah.
because it
I
allows me to
agree.
have a mood and work. For example, I want some
Mhm.
jazz or whatever, or if I want something more, more rhythmically for my exercising and all that. So I
Mhm.
use music, the audio, like you're saying, it's immersive, right? It
Yeah.
you and then emotionally immediately react to it.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, sound is, you can use it as an effective tool, right? To like alter your mood, change or match your mood, or whatever the case may be. And it's interesting. That I became interested in sound. I personally, for a long time, for various reasons, but was like very scared of sound in a sort of strange way because of its immersive capabilities, and because you lose that feeling of control when like you're at a concert and you're there and you're listening, and you can't not like you can't do anything about it. Like it's going to
Yeah,
happen.
you have to react, and your reaction is visceral.
Yeah, and that kind of, for me personally, for a good portion of my life, like that was like an issue for me. I worried about emotion, like experiencing emotions like that, or an uncontrolled environment and things like that. And I think that's one of the things that ended up making it so interesting to me, because it was something that I didn't understand and I wanted to understand. And I was also kind of scared of, and by understanding it, I could be a little less scared of it. I have since obviously embraced sound, but still, I mean, it's still, its effective power, I think, is undeniable. And I think, a lot of people, whether it's music or, like listening to stand-up comedy, I love listening to stand-up comedy while I'm doing different things or driving or whatever. And the way that can elevate your mood,
Yeah, yeah.
make you really cynical depending on which comic you're listening to. But
No, I remember someone it was a product manager somewhere where I worked, and what they were doing is they had they did research, and they had some really interesting findings about what kind of music they will listen throughout the day. So like at the beginning, he was saying something, I probably am not going to get it right, but like at some time of the day, music we're familiar with. Another time of the day, discovery. Another time of the day, wow, there were like 4 or 5 categories. And it was very systematic, meaning empirically, he was able to show you data that they actually, it is a real pattern of behavior, right?
yeah.
Um, and we are not aware of that. I mean, I wasn't aware of that at all. And when he told me that, and I was like, I was observing myself, it's true. I mean, I was listening at a certain type of music at a certain time of the day. And we just live, we are not aware of how powerful sound and music, like, for example, just in terms of like intimidating sounds, like the sound of Quran is very intimidating to me, right? It's very emotional, right? It casts me in a mood, and I am not going to be able to function in the way I want to function if I expose myself to it at a certain time, right?
Yeah.
So there are, there are very, one has to be, like you're saying, one has to be very careful about when one exposes themselves when it comes to sound and music, or poetry.
Mhm.
Like if I read poetry at night, that's very bad, right? I don't know why. My mind just goes on in the wrong direction. Um, but yeah, I think um, on the enlightenment and rationality and so on, um, I think I think what you said was a really interesting, which is uh, to be able to examine something rationally, you have to create a distance, right? You have to say, I am looking at something, and this is the thing that exists in and of itself, right? So that
Mhm.
it feels to me that the big dichotomy in philosophy is being and doing, being
Mhm.
in action. It feels like the visual is platonic. It's is, right? What is justice? What is beauty? What is this and what is that, right?
Mhm.
And that's Plato, right? But before him, Socrates was about talking all the time, constantly, right? Conversation, right? In fact, he was anti-writing, I think, if I remember reading somewhere that, hey, if you start writing, you become lazy or whatever intellectually. And so Plato is always like he reacted to a lot of stuff, right? And the ones who came before him, also Socrates, and I think Aristotle reacted to Plato. But Plato has been like such an influence. And as you're talking about the Enlightenment, it seems to me that the idea of a thing in itself and you and it being separate things um, lends itself to a visually centric, I think, culture, which I think, at least
Yeah.
has been so.
I mean, part of what happens with that sort of mode of thinking is you'd like to draw lines between things and around things. Like this is discrete from that, and that is discrete from that. I think more and more what we're seeing is that, or what we're discovering or uncovering is that it doesn't really work quite like that, and that's what like a lot of post-structuralist thinkers and so like that's one of the reasons that I think Deleuze is so interesting, right? Because
Exactly.
one of the things that he does is kind of really challenge that. And there's even thinking about like the Munya project I mentioned, and like Plato. So the idea of simulacra, like copies and copies of copies, and like the degradation that according to that kind of view that happens in copying. But in the Munya project, what I essentially was doing was like copying and copying and copying and copying and copying, right? On so many different levels, like a copy of a recreation of the architectural reality and the artistic reality of different objects and things, and also sonic recreation and then recreation, right? Like now, it's a translation and it's in English and it's my voice, and but that's not a degradation, it's an interconnection, and it's an opening up of new experiences and opportunities. And uh, the Enlightenment, like you said, and I think the Enlightenment was great for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah.
We made huge strides during that in many ways, but it also, I think, came at the cost of desiring that separation or aiming for that separation that doesn't think in actuality exist. Even like Hume, one of the things he says about sort of the way that you make decisions is like you have an effective reaction to something, and that reaction is what it is, and it's out of these connections to all the experiences you've had, right? And then you use rationality to help you get to the conclusion you've already reached, in a sense. And not that rationality or rational thought can't course correct a little bit, but that you have a reaction, then rationality kind of steps you along to there, steps you along close to there, and maybe you make a little bit of a detour, but that it's not like, you know, the it's not like we go through a rational thought process for every decision we make or everything that we do or think. It just doesn't work like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the scientism. Um, I think I think what happened very high level is the Enlightenment was just impressed the hell out of everyone, meaning science, right? Science was like, oh my gosh, I mean, so many problems are being solved, and just people who lived at the time were just flabbergasted that, hey, this is the way finally we figured it out, right? The way to
Yeah.
move forward, and everything has to be scientific. And you had like Auguste Comte, right? We're gonna figure out how to. It's a science of society, and we figure it out, just like nature, right? And you had like who else? Like Kant, right? Kant wants to be the Newton of ethics, right? System, and you have all these folks who, because science was so successful, right? The idea of rationality solving everything became a thing, right? And I think there's a lot of suffering that came as a result of that. Science has its place. Obviously, it's a tool, it's a methodology for solving certain types of problems, right? But at the beginning, everybody was so impressed that they wanted to use it like it's like a hammer, and everything was a
Mhm.
nail in a way, right?
Yeah.
And it's taken us
Yeah.
a while, right, to sort of extricate ourselves from that. Um, anyway, what do you think? Do you think that that's sort of a simplistic way of looking at it, or useful?
No, I mean, I don't think I think that's about right. I mean, and I guess that the other thing I would just acknowledge is, while the Enlightenment was going on, there's obviously people that didn't follow that, right? That people that challenged that, and and thank you to them for keeping that line of thought alive. And we've inherited both lines of thought. But um, yeah, when you've got something like rational, you've got something like a scientific method and this kind of emphasis on rational thought, and you start applying it. I think there's a lot of costs that came at that, but there's also a lot of benefits that came at that. Even if the benefit is that it doesn't work that well for this thing, and but I think undeniably now we're kind of seeing that, yeah, that's helpful, and like you said, it has its place, but so do a lot of other things.
I mean, art, for example, right? I mean, it is extremely valuable because it provides meaning and so forth,
Mhm.
right? And I
Also,
think, yeah, go ahead.
just the value of human connection, or of connection, period. And sound is one of those things that creates connection. And whether, I mean, it can be to other humans. So like having a conversation, there's a reason that like texting someone feels less intrusive than calling someone,
Yes,
right? And so whether it's between humans having a conversation versus sending an email, things like that, or between businesses or companies or objects, right? If you're talking to your phone, or if you're on a website and you're engaging with that, and either you're talking or it's talking, right? Or to hear the voice of somebody rather than like to hear the voice of a review rather than to read a review, right? And both have their place, but they are two different experiences, and the way that you kind of connect with them, um, you know, whether we like it or not, people kind of automatically engage with voice and sound differently, involuntarily differently than with words that are written on a page. In the same way that you can read words on a page and maintain that kind of distance and step back from it, when it's sound, you have to start relating to it, and you start imagining yourself with it in some way.
yeah. There's this, are you familiar with this concept of Gutenberg parentheses?
Gutenberg, what?
Parentheses?
No.
Yeah. So Gutenberg, right, the printing press, and was it 15th or 16th century?
Mhm.
Before that, a book was very expensive because someone has to write it and so forth. But then,
Yeah.
right, and then when the press, the newspapers and all that, so of course that technology just revolutionized everything, right, communication, and so on. And so the printed word became a thing where could be mass consumed, books and so forth, right? And so we moved towards an era of a lot of reading and writing, right? A lot more than before, obviously. Before that, it was very oral. People talked, communicated through talking and so on and so forth. And so let's say the parenthesis starts then, and then some people are saying that there's the closing of that parenthesis, and I see it actually in a way, right? That people use these kids, right? They text, but it's not really text. It's emojis and this and that, and they use voice a lot more and so forth. And so text is becoming less important, less central, right? Meaning it's sort of becoming confined to certain spaces where it's very important. So it's very important to sit down and write a paper because you have to iterate and get it just right so that once somebody reads it, understands it, right? But for communication, right, who writes letters anymore? We write email. Is that communication? It is, right? But anyway, so I find that really interesting, especially with the rise of audio now all over the place, people being able to express themselves or pursue a passion. They are passionate about organic food, so they have a podcast about organic food every week, and they invite somebody who's also, and they have these conversations, right? Which is interesting. So my last question is this: I think you say in the paper that as a result of the eye being sort of or the ear being subservient to the eye, we lost something. We must have lost something.
Mhm.
As we are getting to a point where there's the ears is being extended some respect and some space, what do you think we're going to be gaining? I know I'm putting you on the spot because it's a tough question to answer,
Big question.
right? What do you think? Like just brainstorming with you, what do you think? How would things change now that there's less of of a focus on perceiving the world through the eye, but perceiving it through the eye and the ear, and maybe olfactory when technology gets there. What do you think?
I mean, I think fundamentally we're going to, and I think we see the beginnings of this already, but like we're going to connect with people and other things, but I guess I'm personally, I don't know, more focused on the people, but connecting with people and more and in really different ways. So like I gave the example of like writing a review versus listening to a review, but and there's also like a temporality of it, like way like we're using, I think we use sound and sight for purposes, right? Like I mean, not like you said, the medium is the message. Part of choosing one of those medium is the message. So like for example, if you write an email, the message you're sending because it's written is it's something that you can, it's not immediate, right? Like potentially, unless I was like, you know, the very important exclamation part, but it's something that you can look at and view and you need to think about and respond to, right? Versus if you give somebody a call and you've got a quick question, you're expecting different kinds of responses with that. And I think we also use it protectively in the same way that I said, you know, we use it to engage with people or not engage with people at different times. Like I may opt to send a text to someone that I really don't want to talk to, you know, rather than give them a call, or opt to give somebody a call that I really want to talk to. But then expanding that out. So those are kind of simple examples about sort of the way we might use that, like use the mediums or media as technologies themselves, technologies to control or to mitigate or, you know, sort of act as go-betweens between our relationships or people, other things, but also just thinking about the ways that people engage. We know that people connect with other people at a different level and in different ways when they use sound, including sound and video. So like, you know, you think of like YouTube or TikTok or, you know, some of these other platforms where people, they won't necessarily be, it's not like they're delivering, you know, lectures or something and saying something absolutely profound every single time, but they may be on there regularly and they develop, you know, people feel like they have a connection to that person. And so I think what it's going to do, whether it's people or connections between different things, what it forces you to do is make those connections, right? Like you have to be in that space and kind of be present in a way and picture yourself there, or picture yourself as, you know, as another person, or picture yourself working with that person, or picture yourself working with that company, whatever the case may be, but really kind of situating and building connections in a multitude of different ways. And I think that's one of the things that, you know, we talked about at the very beginning, is that whether we like it or not, there are sort of these really heterogeneous, multi-directional connections that shift and change radically over time, but we're all in these kind of webs of them. And what I think sound allows you to do is really engage with that web rather than pretend it doesn't exist or kind of setting it aside in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Like my brother, one of my two brothers, right? He's on Facebook. Now he's, for the last, I don't know, few weeks, he's taken to sending me audio instead of typing. I think he discovers like, oh, this is easier. I'm just reading, right? And now so I hear his voice a lot more often than before, right? Which is great, right? So it's sort of a mixture between, it's not a phone call, it's not a text, it's in between.
Yeah.
And it's just the new thing that has emerged, you know, lately, right? And that feature has always been there, but I'm seeing people using it more and more. I don't know why.
Mhm.
Maybe it's just because the ethos right now, the zeitgeist is audio, and people are like, hey, I want to do it in audio, right? But there is value for sure. I can hear his intonations.
Mhm.
He's a very sarcastic guy, very pleasant way though. So, and sometimes when he types, it doesn't come across nice, right? But when you hear him, and I know exactly what he means,
Yeah.
right? And so I've started using it too. Like I respond to him that way. So I think, yeah, go
You
ahead.
create emotional connection that way that you wouldn't have been able to via text, or it wouldn't have been the same. And I think part of also voice, something that you mentioned was like, it's kind of faster and easier. I think part
Yeah.
of
Mhm.
we are doing so many different things and so rapidly now that there's also a sense of like, this is more direct. It's more, I'm not going to sit here and type a 3-page long email. I'm going to just give somebody a call so we can have a conversation for 15 minutes and resolve the issue. Right. And I think there's something about the immediacy of voice too that is sort of accelerated by our times and is accelerating, I think, our times in some ways.
Yeah. Now, which is interesting because I think Gen Z, not Gen Z, the millennials, they were a little bit they were very text heavy and right, not
Mhm.
voice. These Gen Zs and the ones after them, I don't know, they call them alpha, whatever, right? They're more comfortable with voice and audio, which is interesting,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Maybe it's just because they want to differentiate themselves from the ones who came before them, whatever, right? But that's
Yeah.
interesting, right? That they are more likely to pick up the phone and call, right? Which is like a boomer kind of a thing to do that, pick up the
Mhm.
phone call, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so, okay, well, I'll tell you what, the hour went by very fast, and we touched only on like 4 things out of the 45 things I wanted to touch on. But the good news is we are the audience. We're gonna have a podcast, a monthly podcast. We'll be touching on really interesting stuff like this that goes into mixes philosophy with technology and all that good stuff. And so we'll be able to do some deep dives into some profound, really profound questions that are relevant to our time. I think and it's always good to ask questions. I think even if we don't have the answers necessarily. Um,
I always say that I am like a professional question asker, but not necessarily a professional question answerer all the time.
No, I'd rather get somebody asking the right question and then setting me off to start thinking about something than somebody giving me a conclusion, which is good, but not as useful as or fruitful necessarily. I mean, most of the big philosophers, like they are known for the questions they asked or the framing they provided or the concept they provided, so you can ask questions, the tools, right?
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
tools to do things in terms of discovering the world. Um, okay, Jay Yeo, thank you so much
Yeah.
for
Thanks for
being
having
so
me. This
generous
is
with
good
your time
conversation.
and for talking to me.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.